A pathetic ending to a disappointing season for the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to get to all that in a little bit. And the goodbye of an all-time great. We're going to discuss Jason Kelce this morning on Football with Faria. We're going to talk about the Eagles and where they go from here after a horrific showing on Monday night. But before all that, let's get it rolling on another episode of Football with Faria.
It's time for Football with Faria.
You got to get the offense right, and you got to be able to be aggressive. They put up 14 against the secondary. That is driving me up a freaking wall right now.
Now here's your host, Nick Faria.
Ugh. No other way to describe what happened yesterday. No other way to describe it. Eagles go into a playoff game for the third straight year. What is it? Sixth time in 7 seasons. They have been a staple of the playoff the last few years. Go in against a Tampa Bay team that wasn't as talented as them. Wasn't as talented. And they got their absolute door blown off. Wasn't close. It was 13-0 before you could blink. It was 16-9. And there was a glimmer of hope at halftime. And the offense didn't do anything after that. What was it? 32-9? 32-9? It's just unacceptable. It's unacceptable. It's embarrassing. You feel this team's above it because of the veterans they have on this team. Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Jalen Hurts, Darius Slay, James Bradbury. You think about all the veterans that are here from last year's Super Bowl team. And you wonder, how was a team that started 10-1 against the hardest schedule in the league? They had the hardest schedule this year. Start 10-1, and you lose 6 of your final 7. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. And there's a lot of blame to go around. There's plenty of it. And for those of you that are watching that are Eagle fans, leave a comment, leave a question. You guys want to call in? Absolutely. Let's vent together. I have no emotion left. I really don't. I watched that game. I'm usually up and screaming and biting my nails and all that other stuff. It was none of that. Because they were dead on arrival. Game started, and the defense let them walk right down the field. Yeah, it was only a field goal, but you can tell right away there was nothing there. You could tell right away. They couldn't tackle. I'm going to get to James Bradbury in a minute, but they couldn't tackle. They couldn't block. The offensive line this year was just not as good as in years past. The loss of Isaac Seumalo in free agency was a big one. Jordan Mailata, really good. Not all pro. Lane Johnson had a down year. All these things have to be taken into account. The lack of planning, the lack of a system in place for an offense that was top 10 in the league this year. Abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. And today's more of a post-mortem about what's going to happen. Nick Sirianni's future, Jalen Hurts' future. And I look at it, and I truly believe that all of that is the wrong way to go, because I don't think they're done. I don't think this is the end of the road for this Eagles franchise and, the golden era is over. I don't think that. I really don't, because there were fundamental problems going into this season that were going to make it difficult for them to actually look even close to what they did last year. Offensive coordinator gone. Defensive coordinator gone. 8 free agent starters gone. The amount of roster turnover they had this offseason made it seem that there was going to be a drop-off. And there clearly was. So I think a lot of people fell to the expectations of what this team could be going back to last year, which is why there was nothing left for me to yell about. They were done. They walked in. I said it on the show last night. They're done. They were going to lose yesterday, and they absolutely did spectacularly. Just incredible. But to sit here and say that Jalen Hurts has regressed and Nick Sirianni needs to be fired, I don't think we're there yet. I don't think those conversations can happen this year, really, because the drop-off was always going to happen. Jalen was never going to play as well as he did last year, taking care of the ball, making every right decision known to mankind. Made every right decision last year. There's gonna be a drop-off, and he's only in year 4. It's not enough to throw him away and say he's damaged goods. It's far too early for that. And with Nick Sirianni, everyone blames coaching, and I completely agree. I think this year is more to do with coaching than anything else. But am I going to sit here and say they need to fire him? The argument right now is if Sirianni didn't change anything in 2 months, what's to say he's going to change anything in 2024 for next season? And I disagree with that because you have an off season to look back at what worked and what didn't. You have an off season to improve the roster in some fundamental ways. You can upgrade at right guard. And we're going to talk about why you're going to upgrade at right guard in a minute. But you can upgrade at linebacker. You can upgrade at safety. You can add in some extra oomph in the secondary, which is what they need. So to sit here and say that the Eagles are done, I find it laughable. Laughable. Because you really look at it, the teams that are in the playoffs right now and continuing from the playoffs, you got the 49ers that are consistent winners. 49ers, Kansas City Chiefs, and Buffalo Bills. No one expected the Packers to make this jump. The Lions were always going to be a fun team. People were wanting to see what they did, and they took the leap. Credit to them. But I don't think anyone expected the Ravens to have the best record in football this year. I certainly had them competing for a playoff spot, but 14 wins, that's highly impressive. That they clearly played above what a lot of people expected. And the Houston Texans. Who thought the Houston Texans were going to do this? This year has been full of surprises. You've had some very, very good teams either not make the playoffs or get soundly beaten in round 1. Philadelphia being one of them. Dallas being one of them. Miami being one of them. We Jets fans here can joke all the time about, the Dolphins are frauds, they're soft and all that other stuff, but they had a great year too. It may be not great based on the expectations of what they had, but they got to the playoffs as a 5 seed. Back-to-back years they've been to the playoffs. There are teams that are killed for that kind of level of consistency. So I think Philadelphia, their fans, the media, fell victim to the expectations of 2022 because they got off to the fast start. And won ugly. People were always concerned, but they always expected 2022 to happen, and it's just not fair for them to do that. Because Super Bowl hangovers exist. Look at the Chiefs. The Chiefs won their playoff game on Saturday, but have they looked like the dominant force in the AFC this year? Absolutely not. They almost lost the division. So, yes, yesterday was ugly. And it was an abomination of everything the team stands for. And people are going to have to answer to it. But I think the overreaction is fire everyone. Jalen Hurts is done. None of this is going to help get any better soon. And we sort of forget the talent that's still on the team. Adam Schefter put it out yesterday. The free agents that are incoming for Philadelphia. And the top 2 names were Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham. Everyone else rolled to backup player. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Jalen Hurts, all under contract. You're going to have to figure out what you do with DeAndre Swift. Absolutely. But you're going to have $25 million in cap space. You can extend that close to $40 million. There's room for them to be flexible this offseason. And they're going to be flexible. They're going to find the way to improve the team. And people that want to blame Howie Roseman, I think, are moronic. They miss the point because Howie's done this for years. He's done this for years, guys. He doesn't address the linebacker position. He doesn't address the safety position because the analytics tell you can interchange linebackers and safeties. You can't interchange defensive linemen, corners, and wide receivers. That's why they made the investment for Jordan Davis, for A.J. Brown, for Jalen Carter. And they put investments in Zach Cunningham and Nicholas Morrow, who were atrocious last night. So, yes, there's always going to feel like a drop-off when we look at what the Eagles are at the linebackers. You look at what the Eagles are at linebackers right now and compare them to what the Baltimore Ravens, New York Jets, who else? And San Francisco 49ers. Add it all together. You look at all those teams with linebackers. You watch the Eagles linebackers last night. It is a pathetic display of professionalism. They couldn't tackle. They couldn't tackle to save their life. And they weren't the worst ones. Because James Bradbury had, I think, the worst tackle attempt I have ever seen. I played football for 13 years. Pop Warner through high school. I hated tackling. And I've never given that poor of an effort on that one. Holy crap, was that terrible. Jesus. So, what are my takeaways? The team was done already. I had no expectations that playoff game. They were going to get killed, and they got killed. The team was dead. They were dead before the game. They were dead on Christmas Eve when they beat the New York Giants, or Christmas Day. They beat the New York Giants. They ended a 3-game slide, and everyone acted as though the world was ending. You knew then it was over because the team wasn't having fun. They didn't know how to have fun again. And what's the remedy for that? You go searching in the offseason. You go find your identity. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. It's just, it's unacceptable for me to say everything is bad, everyone should be fired. When in reality, it's not the case. They got blown out. And quite frankly, this might be the best thing for them later on. Because Nick Sirianni is now going to have his ass in the fire and saying, how are you going to fix this team? How are you going to make the changes defensively? How are you going to get this offense to look like a properly run system that knows how to handle the blitz, that knows they're a good running team? What are you going to do as head coach to fix that? And if his answer is unsatisfactory, he's probably going to get fired. I've been on the table all the time saying that he deserves another year. But the same thing happened with Doug Peterson. The difference between Doug Peterson and Nick Sirianni over their careers to this point is Doug Peterson refused to change, and Nick Sirianni has done everything, including change. He's changed too quickly to some people's liking, altering the defensive coordinator spot late in the season, as an example. Nick Sirianni's changed too quickly. So now it's going to be up to him to figure out how to fix his team. And if Lurie's not accepting of that answer, then he's going to get fired. And they're probably going to bring in another inexperienced play caller who will be under the thumb of Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie. And it's round and round and round and round we go. They've never hired a veteran head coach. So I don't think Mike Vrabel is coming. I don't think Bill Belichick is coming. But if Sirianni's responses are unacceptable, and he's essentially saying the same thing that Doug Peterson said, then he will have earned that right to be fired. Absolutely. But making matters worse, and I woke up this morning, my wife was getting ready for work, and I sat down, and the Adam Schefter notification came up. Jason Kelce retiring. The fact that the greatest offensive lineman in Philadelphia Eagles history, a top 5 player in Philadelphia Eagles history, went out like that. And I don't blame him either. Jason Kelce's not the reason they lost that game. He's one of the greatest Eagles of all time, and no one played well enough to play another game for him. And what does that tell you? The team was dead. They were dead. They were going to be dead. It was over. It was over weeks ago. If you can't get up for a game knowing that Jason Kelce is gone, the greatest Eagle of the modern era, that tells me you don't want to play. And that's unacceptable. And with Jason Kelce, it's painful. I was extremely emotional when Donovan McNabb was traded to Washington. What was it, off-season 2000, after the 2009 off-season, so 2010. I was extremely emotional because that was my idol. That was the guy that I looked up to. When I played football, I wanted to be like Donovan McNabb. And everyone who's watching, you have your player that you idolize, you wanted to be like. And Jason Kelce's that way for a lot of people. A lot of people. And I said this earlier today on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. There hasn't been a better embodiment of the city of Philadelphia than what Jason Kelce has been for 13 seasons. Most games played as an offensive player in Eagles history, too shy of the all-time record in team history that he's now never going to touch. Because Brandon Graham is staying, and he's going to retire next year. So I'm just going to have the tissues ready, because apparently every all-time Eagle that we have is retiring in the next 2 years. It's incredible. But this is part of the league, part of the game, part of life. Doesn't hurt any less, though. I saw that. There was a massive pit in my stomach. Brittany comes over, and she's like, Nick, are you okay? I know it's a loss and a playoff loss, but you saw the Super Bowl loss last year. And I told her, I'm like, Jason Kelce's retiring. And her face dropped. Because she knows how special he is to Eagle fans. Everyone knows where they were when he gave that speech. I was there. I was at the parade. It was a great time, great experience. And Jason Kelce is sitting there in a mummer's costume. I had no idea what the heck he was wearing. And he starts screaming at the top of his lungs in a microphone. It was amazing. It was the greatest Super Bowl speech of all time. For the greatest center of all time. I know a lot of people love Dermontti Dawson. And rightfully so. Dermontti Dawson is an excellent player. Mike Webster, an excellent player. But when you talk about changing the game, changing the position, you have these trailblazers that change the way a position is looked at all the time. And I think because of the modern era, we look past it. But I truly believe that's what makes players greatness and the greatest of all time. If you have transformed your position in a way that it's never going to be the same again, you are the greatest of all time. And you do it at a high level, too. The perfect example I have is Johnny Unitas. There wasn't a quarterback in football, maybe Otto Graham, but a quarterback that ran his own offense the way Johnny Unitas did. Consistent winner, won in 3 different decades before Tom Brady. And to me, a lot of people love Joe Montana. A lot of people like Terry Bradshaw, Staubach, Aikman. To me, before Brady went on his run in that second run of the dynasty, Johnny Unitas was the unquestioned greatest quarterback of all time. Because he changed the way the position was played. He allowed, by him emerging to become what he was, he allowed the West Coast offense to grow because the quarterback now can get the ball out quick. And that was Johnny's MO. And as Johnny Unitas was a trailblazer for quarterbacks, Jim Brown was a trailblazer for running backs. Barry Sanders was a trailblazer for running backs. Jerry Rice is the greatest football player of all time. Changed the way we looked at receivers. Jason Kelce, before he came into the league, centers had to be a certain build. They weren't supposed to be athletic. It was about snapping the ball and getting into your pass pro. It's essentially what it was. And Jason Kelce comes in as an undersized center, 6th round pick, 2011 draft. He's fast. He's aggressive. He's got a mean streak to him. And he's a great run blocker. And now, it seems every center coming out of college needs to be athletic. Needs to be the Jason Kelce mold. And a perfect comparison is Joe Tippmann for the Jets. I wouldn't put Tippmann as a player that looks and plays exactly like Jason Kelce. But where do you think his athleticism came from? How do you think he was able to translate his athleticism from college to the pros? Every center in this league now has to be quick, smart, cerebral, understanding coverages, understanding everything. We talked about the left tackle being the most important position on the offensive line, and it still is. But no one really expected the center to be this important, and Jason Kelce made it important. He made the position so important that you cannot ignore it. And all the best teams now have top centers. Just look at Kansas City and Creed Humphrey. What Jason Kelce has done for Philadelphia, for the league, for centers everywhere is historic. And that's why I truly believe he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I know no center has ever been one. But when we talk about changing the way centers are looked at and transforming the way those conversations happen around the position, there's only one right answer. It's Jason Kelce. And it sucks. It hurts to the nth degree that we are talking about Jason Kelce playing in this final game as an Eagle. His final home game was a debacle, losing to the 3-4 win Cardinals. And his final NFL game is a 32-9 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. That sucks. It just sucks, man. And it's just terrible. And again, if you're gonna fire Sirianni and clean house of the coaching staff because of this, I get it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. I understand. And I think I came to that conclusion yesterday. I've been pounding the table that they should not be overreactionary when it comes to head coaching decisions. Because if you're reactionary, it never works out. Never does. With Philadelphia, if you fire Sirianni, there's no guarantee that you're going to be as successful. And you look at the Raiders. Raiders, what was it? They fired Callahan after 2003, made the Super Bowl, lost, didn't make the playoffs the next year, and they were just miserable for the next decade and a half. They've still been atrocious. There's no guarantee you're going to find the right guy if you're just going to give up on a coach after making the playoffs. As bad as that game was, as horrific as they looked throughout, there's no guarantee it's going to be an easy fix. No guarantee. And again, this debate goes back and forth because there are people, and I think it's an overwhelming majority right now, that believe that Nick Sirianni is gone. And his inability to update the offense in any logistical way is the reason why the team is where they're at. And it's eliminated before the divisional round. But I do believe he should get an opportunity to find a plan that works. Whether it's firing the passing game coordinator, Kevin Patullo, and bringing in someone new, a veteran guy to sort of stabilize the offense, hiring a new defensive coordinator. Because I'll tell you right now, if Nick Sirianni is looking to bring back Matt Patricia as defensive coordinator, pack his bags. Pack his bags, get him out. It's gonna be awful. Just restart it now. And that's why I'm saying right now, if he is what he has been the last 3 years and fundamentally okay with change, he's going to make the changes necessary to be competitive. He's going to do what he needs to do. If he doesn't, and he's the ostrich with his head in the sand, then there's grounds for removal. Then there's grounds to say, we gave you an opportunity to fix it. We want you to be here to fix it. Fix it. And he says, I want the same stuff we have now. Well, that tells me he's as stubborn as Doug Peterson was without the Super Bowl ring. And that's grounds for firing. That is absolutely grounds for firing. And the one thing that I'll say, because I do want to curtail this conversation a little bit to how the Jets operate. Jets fans are looking and seeing the Dallas Cowboys and Philadelphia Eagles potentially changing coaches after playoff seasons. And it's 13 years and they're not changing their head coach after 4. And Jets fans are saying, we have an owner that's just okay with losing. The Eagles and Cowboys are not satisfied with losing. But the one thing that I'll say to that argument, and I get it, I understand the argument, but the one thing that I'll say to that is what Philadelphia and Dallas are doing right now isn't a good thing. It's not a sign of a well-run organization if you get to a win total that gets you into the playoffs and has you considered as a top team in the conference, and you're firing everybody because of the lack of success late in the season. It's not always a good sign. And for Jets fans that are saying, well, we would rather have that conversation than the current one they're having, be careful with that. Because as I just referenced with the Raiders in 2003, just because a reactionary move is made doesn't mean it's going to work out. And the counterpoint is going to be, oh, well, the Denver Broncos did it with John Fox. Denver did it with John Fox. They fired him. They parted ways. Next season, Gary Kubiak, they win the Super Bowl. There's a fundamental difference for that. There's a fundamental difference as to why that worked out. One of them is Peyton Manning. You had one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time to stabilize things. And the other is you had an all-time defense. An all-time defense. Von Miller won Super Bowl MVP. There's no guarantee that Gary Kubiak is a Gary Kubiak type guy is walking through that door in Philadelphia. And you better make sure this hiring is right. Because if you mess up now, you essentially blow up the Jalen Hurts era. That's why I say maybe let's be a little patient. Let's see what kind of changes Sirianni wants to have before making a decision on if they're going to fire him or not. Let's see what they do. Let's see what Sirianni wants to do. Because if he wants to change and you get rid of him, he could go to Atlanta, he could go to Vegas, he can go to a lot of different places and be really successful. And then we're looking at Philadelphia as the team that ran out Andy Reid after a 4-12 year. And it was the right decision. He needed to get out. No one disagrees with that decision because it had to be done for Andy and for the team. Andy needed that break as much as anyone. He needed to get out of Philadelphia. They got rid of Doug Peterson 3 years after the Super Bowl win. You fire Nick Sirianni 2 years removed from a Super Bowl appearance. What kind of head coach do you think is going to want to come here? What kind of head coach is going to want to come here and say, in a volatile situation where the fans are thinking Super Bowl, I want to jump in and do this, even though it might take me a couple of years to get everything situated? Because again, it hasn't happened since Jeffrey Lurie bought the team that they've hired a veteran head coach, because it's worked. The system they've had in place works to find young coaches, inexperienced guys that need development and grow into great ones. Andy Reid being one of them. Doug Peterson being one of them. All these things are included. So I look at the conversation of why Sirianni should be fired. I get it. And for you Eagle fans out there listening, you guys think he should, let me know. I'd love to debate. But if I'm looking at where this team is and where this team has to go for 2024, I'm not as negative as a lot of people are, because I see the blueprint. I see the pieces in place to succeed. You've got 2 number 1 receivers. You got a franchise quarterback. You have 2 really good tackles. You have pass rushers. You have a number 1 corner in Darius Slay. Defense obviously is going to need some help and improvement, but your defensive line is fine. You need linebackers. You need safeties. You need another corner. You need to figure out what you're going to do post Jason Kelce. But again, is this enough to blow it all up as some people want? Of course not. Of course not. And people want to be overreactionary. They want to say the sky's falling and all this stuff, and it's the end of the world. Oh my God, it all stinks. It's not the case. It's not the case. It's never going to be the case. It will improve, because Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie, if there's one thing that they have shown, is they have shown an ability to build some unbelievable rosters and then blow it up really fast after. It's just how it goes with them. That's what they do. It's how they built their team. They are what the New Jersey Devils were with Lou Lamoriello. I'm going to build championship rosters left and right, and then I'm going to blow it up the second things start going wrong. They have the Super Bowl. They've been to multiple Super Bowls now. Clearly, what they do works. Clearly, the analytical side of things work. It's just a matter of, at some point, it's not going to. And are you really going to make the Nick Sirianni fire the reason why it doesn't? And it's why I think patience is always something that people need to relax. From D-Mac, Nick, keep up the good work. Hoping this takes off for you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. But I'll tell you what, it's watching Jason Kelce retire, watching him walk off that field. You tell me that's not a gut punch. You're an Eagles fan, and there's going to be fans that were very happy that the Eagles lost. I have a couple of in-laws, brother-in-law, cousin-in-law. They've already been reaching out, making fun. They're Giant fans, so I'm not really sure why they're even talking, but still. But it's hard to look at that game, and you can make fun of the Eagles all you want and give us a crap. But it's hard not to look at that game and look at Jason Kelce and say, damn, that's how he has to go out. Terrible. Terrible. And it's just, it further shows you can have all the talent in the world, but if you have bad coaching, it all collapses in on itself. And maybe this is unraveling. Maybe the win against the Bills and the blowout losses to Dallas and San Francisco were the beginning of the unraveling of the Nick Sirianni era. Maybe that's the case. But if I'm going to sit here and say that, then you better make sure you get the next coaching hiring right. Because you cannot waste the Jalen Hurts era on guys that are bad. And people will talk about, well, Jalen Hurts is no better. He's got his problems. He's too stoic. And I laugh at that comparison. I laugh at those complaints. Because again, it proves to me that football fans don't know what they're talking about. You don't know what you want in anything. They don't know leadership if it hits them smack dab in the face running butt naked down the field. Jalen Hurts is a phenomenal leader. He's a phenomenal leader. Everyone says it in the locker room. People will point to the Dallas Goedert video last night, but they will ignore what Dallas Goedert said after the game. And that Goddard saying, I wasn't yelling at Jalen, I was yelling at myself. It was ridiculous. I'm not playing well. But we don't want to use that because it gets in the way of the narrative that Jalen Hurts isn't a good leader, which, again, is a load of crap because you can't have it one ear or the other. You want a quarterback to be one way, and you want him to be stoic. When it's good, he's the same way as when it's bad. Well, it's bad. And now you're saying he needs to be different? You were just saying a month ago, 2 months ago, that it's perfect. When they're down, he's the same. Think about that. Think about that for a minute. If you're arguing about a quarterback, and there's things to argue about Jalen Hurts, the turnovers this year were unacceptable. I think he got a little antsy in the pocket at times because the offensive line wasn't as good. But I look at Jalen, and I don't think leadership's the problem. Leadership doesn't come to mind. Jalen didn't have a good playoff game yesterday, but was he the reason why they lost? Absolutely not. The defense couldn't tackle. The defense couldn't tackle a single player out in the open field. You had one touchdown, the first touchdown of the game. It's a simple man crossing route. And the safety, Avonte Maddox, runs up and tackles the corner, not knowing where he is on the field. It's not Jalen Hurts' fault. Jalen got him within 7. It was a beautiful throw, the deep pass to Devontae Smith. And by the way, let me tell you, if there's one player that's going to be completely exonerated from that game, it's Devontae Smith. He was the only one that showed up the entire game, completely dominated on the field, set a franchise record for receiving yards in a playoff game. Absolutely, you give him a blank check, whatever you want. Absolutely. But again, is Jalen Hurts' fault for their loss? No, of course not. Jalen Hurts is not calling wide receiver screens every third down. He's not keeping the ball and not running the ball after getting a first down in the first 2 plays. They got a first down on 2 straight runs. And then they threw 12 straight passes. The coaching staff panicked, as they've been panicking all year. So I truly believe, and again, this isn't to say Jalen Hurts is absolved. He had a terrible safety that really changed the game from ugly playoff game to blowout. The safety was awful. He wasn't exactly reading very well. But he was second in the league in touchdowns this year. He was dominant for most of the season. Essentially, what they need to do is they need to get an offensive system that allows him to play freely. If that means taking some responsibility in pre-snap, so be it. So be it. That's okay. Sometimes you're going to need that. Sometimes just simplifying the game is helpful, which is why I'm interested to see what Philadelphia actually does in this next offseason, this upcoming one. Because obviously no one's happy about the loss. Everyone's pissed off. Jeffrey Lurie, there was a beautiful shot up on Monday night, on the Monday night broadcast, and he was clearly livid. A lot of people said that this isn't a good sign for Nick Sirianni. I get it. But is it enough to change the coaching staff? Defensive coordinator? Yes. I'm still iffy about the offense because the one thing Jalen Hurts has been begging for years is he needs stability at play caller. Stability. He hasn't had that. He hasn't had it in Philly. He had Shane Steichen for 2 years. It was Doug Peterson and Shane Steichen for 2 years, and now Brian Johnson. And I believe that Brian Johnson should get another potential year to develop and see where the offense goes in 2024. See where it leads. If he's improved, then you keep rolling. If not, you change up. But I can't in good conscience say an 11-6 first-round exit, as bad as it got, is grounds for firing a year after the Super Bowl. The reason why the Raiders fired Callahan in 2003, they didn't make the playoffs. They were one of the worst teams in football that year. One of the worst. Philadelphia wasn't that. They were down the stretch. They absolutely were down the stretch. But they weren't this year. And that's why I say pump the brakes on firing. Pump the brakes on trying to find someone, because the grass isn't always greener. It's not always the case. So for final thoughts today, first off, again, Jason Kelce retiring. Miserable that he had to retire after that. 13 seasons, 6 All-Pros, 7 Pro Bowls, the greatest center of all time. He's going to get his jersey retired. He should have his jersey retired next year. That is how special he has been to the organization. Unbelievably special. And what does it mean for Sirianni now? A 32-9 playoff loss is the outcome of the 2023 season. No one really knows. No one knows except for Jeffrey Lurie and Nick Sirianni, because I believe his future will depend on his plan going forward. When he has his meetings with Jeffrey Lurie and he says, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z to change this up. If Jeffrey Lurie is accepting of that plan, he will stay for another year. If not, we're going to be in the market for a new head coach, whether it be Slowick, Ben Johnson, whoever it is. Whoever it is. But I think it was also very telling that a lot of players stuck up for Nick Sirianni yesterday. Jalen Hurts may not have. I argue with people back and forth. I argued with Ed Kratz after the game where I felt that Hurts gave a defense of Sirianni when he says, is he going anywhere? I didn't think he was going anywhere. And people took it as, well, he didn't say yes. Essentially him saying yes. Where's he going to go? He's the head coach. So there's going to be back and forths about Sirianni with Hurts and all that other stuff. That very well could be the end of Sirianni's tenure. Very well could be the case. But we don't know yet. Tuesday morning, just about to be 10 o'clock. And there's a lot that needs to happen before the Eagles prepare for the offseason. What happens to Nick Sirianni? How do you replace Jason Kelce? What happens with Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox? All these things are going to be talked about. All these things are coming up. It's going to be a very bumpy offseason for this franchise if they are going to want to continue to be the contenders that they have been over the last few years. It's going to be very interesting. For those that jumped on, thank you guys so much. We'll see you guys tomorrow. We'll talk more about the ever-encompassing NFL. We'll talk about some of the coaching changes that have happened, some coaching changes that might happen, and we'll bring in some Jets talk as well, winners and losers for this season for New York, and we'll get to all of that later on tomorrow. But from now, thank you guys so much for jumping on, and we'll see you guys on Wednesday.